Welcome to 2819. This is the show where we aim to inspire you to go and make disciples of all nations. I'm Sandra Dimes.
And I'm Brian Rohenbacher, and this is a television outreach of Reasons to Believe, a viewer-supported ministry where science and faith converge.
And if you'd like to support resources like this show, please visit reasons.org/2819.
And we hope this show will inspire you to step into conversations about your faith with both confidence and compassion.
And as you're watching today, you know what? Get connected with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're at 2819 Show. We'd love to hear from you.
And I'll be sure to like your comments. And as a reminder, the podcast version of 2819 is now available on Apple Podcasts and Google Play. So you can listen to us on the go. Just check out Reasons to Believe podcasts on either one of those.
We have a great show for you today. In our Nexus segment, we'll see a clip from our AMP conference. Jay Warner Wallace will discuss whether direct evidence is better than circumstantial evidence. So that's an important topic when thinking about why we believe what we believe.
Yes, definitely stick around and check that one out. In Culture Talk, Sandra will talk about why science apologetics matters. It's not just about helping us build the case for our faith, but also to lead us into worship.
Then in our RTB News segment, Monica will talk with Ken Hultgren about our fiscal year end and how you can help support faith-affirming resources like this show.
Then in Give and Take, Jeff Zweerink will talk with RTB visiting scholar Ken Wolgemuth about the Grand Canyon and flood geology.
But first up in RTB 101, Krista will talk about something probably many of us have wondered, especially living in California. Why would God allow earthquakes? Those terrifying things. Let's check it out.
Now it's time for RTB 101. This is the segment where we talk about practical questions to help equip you to share your faith with friends and family more effectively. And I'm joined again by my colleague, Dr. Jeff Zweerink. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, Krista. It's good to be here again.
I should probably add physicist and all-around good guy.
You could do that. I like physics, so okay. Sure.
So, you know, there's earthquakes, it seems, in the news all the time. And right. I thought it would be good if we could have a few minutes to reflect on earthquakes. And probably the first thing we should say is that earthquakes are rough news for people who live through them.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And well, I mean, I have to say, as a person who likes exotic things, you know, I always wanted to see a tornado. When I moved to California, within about a year, I experienced my first earthquake. And so there's kind of a fascination as long as you don't get hurt in them.
Yeah, exactly.
But to people who've experienced damage, I mean, that's just a challenging thing. So
sometimes I hear from my non-Christian friends that earthquakes seem to be incompatible with the existence of an all-loving God, you know, because they do bring often such devastation. So help us think through that a little bit.
Well, I think there's two things that I would say in response to that. One is that as we've studied how the earth works, that the earthquakes are a consequence of the fact that we have plate tectonic activity. And that may not seem like a big deal, but I can tell you this, that a planet that doesn't have any plate tectonic activity is not going to support life, because that's kind of the global thermostat. It's what makes continents. It's what changes the atmosphere as the sun gets brighter. So plate tectonics are incredibly crucial for a planet to be habitable. And earthquakes are just a natural consequence of these plates rubbing next to each other.
So not all planets have plate tectonics.
No, in fact, you know, we look at Mars and Venus, our nearest neighbors, and Mars had plate tectonics way in the past, you know, billions of years ago. Venus we see more recently, but both of them are devoid of life because the plate tectonic activity stopped long ago.
So what can we say then to our non-Christian friends? Is it like, well, this is just science, it's just physics? Is God kind of divorced from the whole equation and he's sort of back here and just, he's wound it up and here's how it is?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. Is it, you know, while it's clear that it's very important for what's going on, but there's also, it's not as though earthquakes are particularly surprising. I mean, we live in California. You prepare for earthquakes, and as you prepare for earthquakes, the damage that earthquakes do goes way down. You know, there are places like Japan which have earthquakes. They prepared for earthquakes, and so they can have mammoth earthquakes and have relatively small damage, whereas other places have much smaller earthquakes and have enormous damage because they didn't prepare for them. So there's kind of while they're very well designed, important for life, we also can't we've got to take that into account and be prepared for them. And that's what will mitigate a lot of the damage that an earthquake will do.
So when we think about where we build houses, we in California
And how we build the house.
have a tendency to build them on fault lines.
You notice that too.
Yes. So we might be putting ourselves a little bit more in harm's way than if we have a house in another part of the country, but that might have a different natural disaster.
Right. Well, and even beyond that, you can build on the fault line as long as you reinforce the house. There are things you can do.
Building codes.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
I was very upset at building codes because they made my house more expensive. But as I've seen the earthquakes, I'm like, okay, this is actually a really good thing that I had to deal with all that.
So in more impoverished countries where there's less resources available, maybe governments are more corrupt and don't enforce building codes, that tends to be a contributing factor to why we see more devastation.
And that's where you tend to see a lot of the very devastating earthquakes, whereas the ones that take it seriously, there's damage, but not nearly the scale of damage. So.
Now let's flip it around a little bit, because I've even heard some Christians say that, well, earthquakes are a judgment of God. Like, that really rubs non-Christians the wrong way. How would we think about that?
You know, the way I would say it is I think God designed his creation to work very well. And we neglect how it works to our peril. But to say, oh, this earthquake is clearly a judgment from God. I mean, you know, there are places where God will do that. But in general, earthquakes are the way it works. And God's designed it to do that. And we need to adjust to what God has done and prepare for it. But the idea of going out and saying, oh, this is clearly a judgment from God just simply because an earthquake happened, doesn't adequately account for how God has designed things to work. So I think we've got to be very, very careful.
Probably not the best approach.
I would agree, not the best approach at all.
Very good. And once again, I want to invite you to check out Jeff's blog, Impact Events, for more scientific discoveries and how they provide evidence for the God of the Bible. And right now we're going to hear from our friend Jay Warner Wallace and how he, as a cold case detective, looks at evidence. Let's check it out.
Direct evidence is eyewitness testimony. That's all that counts as direct evidence. Indirect evidence is everything else. Well, DNA at the crime scene, that's not direct evidence. That's indirect evidence. Witnesses who can tell you what they saw the suspect do, that is direct eyewitness testimony. That's all that counts. Now, sometimes we use a different word for this indirect evidence. We call this circumstantial evidence. So these are the two groups. And I'll bet you when you hear this term, circumstantial evidence, you're like, that's just junk. You know, you hear on TV all the time, all they have is a circumstantial case, right? Well, that's all I ever have. I work cold cases. They went cold for a reason. There's no eyewitnesses. So when I get a case to begin with, it's terrible. It's a mess. And it's built on circumstantial evidence. But we can still, as a matter of fact, judges tell juries all the time that they are not to consider circumstantial evidence as being any less valuable than direct evidence. They are to be given the exact same weight in your jury deliberations. So stop saying it's just a circumstantial case, because that means there's something less about no, it's a circumstantial case. But it's not just a circumstantial case. Does that make sense? As a matter of fact, let me show you the jury instruction. Here's what judges tell juries in jury trials before they start the deliberations. Both direct and circumstantial evidence are acceptable types of evidence to prove or disprove the elements of a charge, including intent and mental state and acts necessary to a conviction. And neither is necessarily more reliable than the other. Neither is entitled to any greater weight than the other. So I'm here to tell you guys, we build cases about the existence of God that could be described as circumstantial. No kidding. That's how we do cases, and probably 85% of cases in America are entirely circumstantial. That's how we build cases. Don't let anyone tell you that you've got to have a direct witness you can interview in order to believe something is true. Be ready to kiss down all of history then. You couldn't even know anything about your own great-grandparents if you had to have somebody alive who could say, I saw them do this. No, you're taking it on the strength of somebody else's testimony. You have to make these cases circumstantially. So just know that that's an entirely appropriate way to make a case. That's okay. Something else I learned about evidence. There's a big difference between what is possible and what is reasonable. Anything is possible. We don't even count possible. Possible doesn't matter to me in a jury trial. Hey, it's 9:15, a little bit later than 9:15. How do you even know you're here? You could be oversleeping right now. You could be in a dream state right now, dreaming about being here this morning. And if you think, well, I can test that, I can ask the person next to me, or I can pinch myself, that could just be part of your dream. That's possible. You have to at least admit it's possible you're just dreaming all this. But it's not reasonable. Anything is possible, but not everything is reasonable. And that's why, folks, our jury standard, the standard of proof in the most difficult criminal trials, is not beyond a possible doubt. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. Why? Because if it was beyond a possible doubt, you'd never convict anybody.
If you'd like to hear more from Jay Warner Wallace, visit coldcasechristianity.com. Now it's time for Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of faith and pop culture and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined today with Fazale Rana, biochemist, friend, and someone who has a big heart for understanding the Creator, right?
Yes, I do.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to talk about science apologetics. So for people who are right-brained like me, when we think about science apologetics and just learning more about science and how that reveals the Creator, it can kind of seem like it's just head knowledge, and we're more heart and art people. So can you give us some insight on how we can use science apologetics for evangelism?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to remember is that there are people that evidence is really very important, that 2 + 2 has to equal 4. Right. And so we read in Scripture that God has made himself known to us through the record of nature. And of course, science is the way that we study nature. And so we would expect that scientific discoveries should reveal evidence for God's fingerprints, but also for his attributes, his glory, his majesty, his faithfulness, his goodness, his love. And so we're not just getting evidence that God exists, but we're getting more than that. We're getting an insight into who the Creator is. And I think that's the bridge between those people that need evidence and are more intellectual in their pursuit of faith and those people that maybe are more driven by other factors like art and music and just a desire to emotionally connect with their Creator.
Right. Well, it was something, I was listening to a worship song called So Will I by Hillsong, and it actually made me have a deeper appreciation for what we do here at Reasons to Believe. Now, of course, we talk about science and apologetics for the purpose or for the sake of evangelism. And so when I was listening to that song, it really helped articulate what I feel about what we're doing. I'm just going to read one lyric in particular. It says, "I can see your heart in everything you've done, every part designed in a work of art called love." So can you give an example when we think about creation and you studying creation, can you give an example of how your study through science has brought you closer to the Creator and to his heart?
Well, for me, it was science that brought me to the recognition that God exists and opened me up to the gospel. And what I was impressed with was just the elegance and the sophistication and the ingenuity of biochemical systems. And so there's an underlying wisdom that you see that's expressed in the way things work in nature. But there's also an incredible beauty. That's what drew me to study biochemistry to begin with, is I actually find molecules to be incredibly beautiful. They have wonderful and elegant shapes. There's a beautiful symmetry that you see in molecules. So there's a beauty that I see, and I think anybody can appreciate the beauty of creation, whether you understand that beauty in more scientific terms or understand it more artistically. And so to me, it's that evidence that goes from God's existence to the beauty that then begins to help us see God's glory and majesty, his goodness. The artistry of creation says that God himself is an artist in his very essence, and that to me prompts me to worship. Right. And to want to draw closer to that God.
Well, it makes me think of a time when I had a really difficult time just struggling with my faith, and just understanding science apologetics. It seems weird, like I never would have thought that science would have helped me cling to my faith, but it really did. And so I think for those right-brained people, even if we're not compelled to think about science and to look for the Creator there, that we ought to, because it can help us to hold on to that truth that we see also in the record of nature.
Well, the grandeur of creation, the beauty of creation will prompt us to worship, or it should prompt us to worship. But these are also aspects of creation that we can use to make a formal argument for God's existence, kind of combining worship and apologetics. And it's called the argument for God's existence from beauty. And the idea is that a world in which God created would be beautiful. And if we're made in God's image, we should be able to perceive that beauty. But if the world is the product of brute forces and brute reality, and that we're just a product of evolution, then the universe shouldn't be beautiful and we shouldn't perceive beauty. And so this is a way where you can actually bridge the right brain and the left brain together with science, right?
Well, thank you for that. And then one last point, when you mentioned about just bridging that gap, it brings me to this other lyric. It says, if the stars were made to worship, so will I. So I think it's just beautiful to think of creation and what we learn from it, that it should motivate us to worship. Yeah. So thanks so much for that, Fuzz. If you want to hear more from Fuzz, you can visit reasons.org and check out his blog, The Cell's Design.
Hi, I'm Monica Jones, and today I'm here with RTB Special Assistant to the President, Ken Hultgren. Ken, thanks for being here. Let everybody know why you're here.
Yeah, as everyone knows, that RTB's mission is to spread the Christian gospel through science. And so one of the things, if you're a regular watcher of this program, you know that we're donor supported. So that means things that we do like our AMP conference or even publishing our books or this program, these are primarily sponsored by donors. And so for us to be able to continue these things, as well as some of the exciting initiatives that we're doing in the coming year, we need people's participation and support.
What are some of the other initiatives that we have going on?
Yeah, one of the things I'm most excited about is our Reasons Forum. And basically that is a live Q&A from the RTB Conference Center with our scholars. And it literally is being broadcast around the world, and people can text in their questions to participate in that. We also have our Speakers Bureau that we're going to be starting with speakers that will be available to speak at churches almost anywhere around the country. And also our Visiting Scholar Program, where we are actually partnering with scholars that come to the RTB headquarters, and we partner in programs and projects with these scholars.
Okay, so how can somebody give to Reasons to Believe?
Probably the best way is to do it online.
Okay.
And the person can go to give.reasons.org, and there's a great process there for helping them do that.
That's awesome. Thanks for being with me. I really hope if you feel led to give to Reasons to Believe that you will check out the website, give.reasons.org. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Hello, Jeff Zweerink again here with Give and Take, where we explore the latest scientific issues to help equip you to be confident in the truth of Christianity. We have a special guest in studio today, Ken Wolgemuth, and we are going to be addressing a neat topic, an important topic. Did Noah's flood cause the Grand Canyon? Ken, good to have you here today.
I'm glad to be here, Jeff.
Looking forward to this. I know you've been in, you're a geologist, have been in the area of petroleum geology, worked there for a number of decades. And so I really just am excited about the opportunity to delve into this question, because it's one that causes quite a bit of tension within the church. You know, the whole old earth, young earth, how old are things? Yep. And what do we do with the Grand Canyon? So I guess I'll just throw the question to you. How would you respond to someone who makes the claim that Noah's flood caused all of the Grand Canyon?
Well, every time that I read the Genesis record, what is coming out in Genesis 6 and 7, and the description there is that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and waters kept rising and rising and rising and rising and rising. So the biblical record shows the context of continually rising water in one fell sequence.
Right.
However, when we look at the Grand Canyon, we don't see a singular sequence of filling up all these rocks in the Grand Canyon in one big sequence. So there's a dramatic difference in that.
So explain what you mean by that. How do we? What's the evidence that there's not this continuous sequence?
Yeah, the sediments in the Grand Canyon are what geologists call the era of the Paleozoic, and the lower five formations of the periods of the lower Paleozoic are Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, and Mississippian.
Okay.
So that's the context of the geologic timescale.
Okay, and so presumably the Cambrian is older, and then these other ones are progressively younger. And
yeah, and that's what we refer to relative time. Cambrian's older, and the Mississippian is the youngest of this particular sequence. Well, when we examine the rocks themselves and the nature of the fossils that are in these, We have the Cambrian, and there's a limestone deposited during the Cambrian.
Okay.
Then the Ordovician and the Silurian are completely missing. The rocks are missing in terms of the fossils that we know from Europe and from the rest of North America, such as the Appalachians. There is no Ordovician or Silurian.
So wouldn't that just indicate that maybe there was some sort of catastrophic flood that did different deposits, different areas of the world? So the geologic column isn't really representative of time.
Yeah. Well, when we think about the logic of the whole sequence, that doesn't fit the story in the sense that limestone that's Cambrian also has evidence of erosion that took place, like that was an open landscape for a period of time.
Okay.
And there is evidence of channels being cut into that mauve limestone that's down on the base there, that lowest formation in the sequence. Then channels cut in.
So presumably the Cambrian would have had to have been laid down during the flood and then eroded and carved out during the flood as well.
Yeah,
for that to be the explanation.
Yeah. And then we completely missed the Ordovician and Silurian fossils.
Okay.
So it was a time when that area was above land. There was nothing being flooded over there.
Okay, so the lack of deposition means that area was above water, so it couldn't have been underground during the flood.
It couldn't have been under the flood.
Okay,
could not possibly. There's no reason to think that it would be under the flood.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got these two missing major epochs or eras of geological history missing. What other sorts of things lead you to say that no, you can't get the Grand Canyon out of a single flood?
Yeah. Well, the next formation is Devonian. So the Devonian now is sitting on top of Cambrian, which with time missing. So that's missing time.
All right.
Then after the Devonian, the next one above that is what's called the Red Wall Limestone, which is Mississippian.
Okay.
The youngest of those five that I mentioned.
Okay.
The Mississippian Limestone, which is the Red Wall Limestone by name, is that reddish streak that you see every time you see those pictures of the Grand Canyon.
Right.
That's a thick, 400 foot thick limestone. Limestones don't form by floods. Limestones are coral reefs. Limestones are formed because calcium and carbonate is taken out of the water by chemical means, by organisms making shells, or else by inorganic precipitation. And so it's a shallow marine tropical environment.
Okay, so that's interesting because in order to form limestones, you have to have sort of shallow marine environments for that to be the case. And so if we're talking about a flood that's covering the whole earth, you're fairly deep to do that, and you're not going to get limestones.
Precisely. It's not a limestone depositional setting. Then even after the deposition of the Red Wall Limestone, there was also a time period when this was above land surface, and again, channels were cut in the Red Wall Limestone.
Okay.
There are caves that were formed by acid rain as it falls down on a limestone. Tends to be a cave-forming process.
Okay.
So caves are there also before the next formation that was above that. And again, definitely clearly indicating the passage of time between the Red Wall Limestone and the next formation above it.
So it seems like there's two different lines of evidence there. One is that by missing these two eras that we see throughout the rest, or scattered throughout the rest of the world, that whatever was going on in the Cambrian, there were long periods of time before the other layers were put down on top of it.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, even within the layers, you have evidence of those layers being there up above the water, being eroded, caves formed, those sorts of things.
Exactly.
And then water covering and redepositing. Yeah. So you've got at least two separate segments of water covering there, right?
Yeah.
What other types of evidence would you point to there?
Another dramatic piece is that there are no dinosaur fossils in the Grand Canyon, whatever. The dinosaurs didn't even live, God had not even created the dinosaurs yet at this point, because the dinosaurs are Mesozoic, which is younger. It's later in time. So
and we know that there were dinosaurs up in Utah, so that's not that far away.
It's not far away, but those were in much younger sediments, in the logical order from the oldest to the youngest coming up to the north.
So this really, when you get in and analyze it carefully, this really does argue that there's an antiquity of the Grand Canyon, and it seems to be a great intricacy in the processes God used to form it all.
Exactly. No question about it. The evidence is abundant and compelling. And that's what drew me into, with a group of colleagues, we wrote a book on the Grand Canyon. It's called Grand Canyon Monument to an Ancient Earth. And we cover fossils, we cover geologic time, we cover sedimentary processes and how those are formed, and we describe the history of the Grand Canyon as modern Christian geologists would recognize it once we do a lot of investigation of the canyon itself.
You know, the Grand Canyon really does tend to evoke awe and inspiration as you see it. And this can cause, well, it's caused tension in the Christian church, and often people outside the church can ridicule the church because of our views. But what I find amazing is that as we look into the processes and understand how the Grand Canyon formed, as detailed in Ken's book, that we see just an intricate working of God creating this spectacular wonder that draws us to worship Him, that we can now use to engage others and just ask, who is this Creator and how might we worship Him?
That about does it for us. Thanks for joining us this week on 2819.
And we hope our discussions today will help equip you to step into conversations and just share your faith.
And as a reminder, this show is made possible through the faithful support of Reasons to Believe donors. If you feel led to support resources like this show, please visit reasons.org/2819.
And until next time, you can check us out at reasons.org. And you can also connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 2819 Show. Say hi, tell us your favorite color.
See you next week.